Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Rowan Neufeld. I'm the events coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. Tonight's event is coming to you live from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. A special hello to anyone who is watching us on the live stream. There were a few people waiting. So hello, thank you. And of course, everyone who's here in person, thanks so much for coming tonight. Out of an abundance of caution, we're just asking that you keep your masks on for the duration of the event. I think that's all the housekeeping I have. So it's my pleasure to welcome Naomi Hansen here tonight for the launch of Only in Saskatchewan, Recipes and Stories from the Province's Best Loved Eateries. Let's give her just some welcome applause. Only in Saskatchewan has already been on the top of our bestseller list for several weeks now, so congratulations on that. I'd also like to thank Curtis Samuel and all the folks at TouchWood Editions for working with us on tonight's event. We also have a special in conversation guest host, Ashley George, who we'll introduce a little bit later. But for right now, I want to introduce Naomi Hansen. She's a writer, editor, and researcher based in Saskatoon. She writes about lifestyle topics like food and tourism, as well as history and the environment. She's written for various publications, including CBC Saskatchewan and the Saskatoon StarPhoenix, Tourism Saskatoon, as well as the CAA Saskatchewan magazine. And Only in Saskatchewan is Naomi's first book. Please welcome Naomi Hansen.
Okay, good evening and welcome to the official launch for Only in Saskatchewan. I am so thrilled to be here this evening, joined by all of you, and a very warm welcome to all of you, whether you're joining us in person or those of you who are joining us on the live stream. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to start with a few thank yous off the top, and I will try and keep it brief. The first thank you goes to McNally Robinson for hosting this event. I obviously am excited about this event because it's the launch of my first book, but the fact that this is being held at McNally Robinson really is very special for me because I grew up coming to this bookstore. And I have always loved books and I've always loved reading. And I remember coming here as a child and thinking it was just the most enchanting place with the tree trunk and the staircase. And all my favorite books, of course, at that point were on the second floor. And so I run up there and look at the books, and there's kind of like a corner section on the second floor by the till upstairs. And back in the day when Groovy Girls were all the rage, does anyone remember Groovy Girls? Okay, so they were these like plush dolls that had clothes and accessories that go with them. Anyway, McNally had a fantastic selection of Groovy Girls in that very corner. So I'd always run up there and look at the books and the Groovy Girls. They even had the Groovy Girl car, which was like this very large plush car. You could fit two of the girls in the car, which is very exciting. Anyway, and then later on, we would come here for many, we've enjoyed many meals at Prairie Inc. And I would always look up at the authors on the wall and just be very inspired and sort of daydream about what it might be like to be an author. And so the fact that this is being held here at McNally and the fact that my book is being sold here is very special to me. And so I just want to say thank you so much to McNally Robinson, to Rowan, and to all the wonderful staff here. Second, I'd like to thank Ashlyn George for being here. I met Ashlyn a couple of years ago now. We have both been involved in a Saskatoon freelancer group in the past. And when I asked her to host the launch, I was so thrilled when she agreed. You'll see soon that she's absolutely lovely. So thank you, Ashlyn, so much for being here. I appreciate it. Of course, I would not be standing here without the amazing TouchWood Editions team. TouchWood Editions is really an incredible publisher. I cannot say enough about them. They have been so lovely, really working on Only in Saskatchewan, you know, from the beginning when it was an idea and refining the concept, all the way through the editing, the designing, and now, of course, the marketing and media. And as a new author, I've had so many questions, and they have been just so patient with me. So really such a supportive and encouraging publisher. I specifically want to thank Taryn Boyd, Tori Elliott, Kate Kennedy, Curtis Samuel, Leslie Cameron, Sydney Barnes, Paula Marchese, and Tree Abram for all your work on Only in Saskatchewan. I have said it before, but I will say it again, that they are really an absolute dream team to work with. Of course, I would also not be standing here if it weren't for everyone who contributed to this book. I know that some people are joining us virtually from across the province tonight, so a very warm welcome to you all, and thank you so much for your contributions to this book. Obviously, the book would never have come together if those contributions hadn't happened, and I know that the entire time this project was ongoing, the pandemic was also happening, so of course not the easiest time for the hospitality industry, and so really I am so grateful for those contributions and for their willingness and excitement to put the project really throughout every step of the way. So very warm welcome to you, and thank you very much. Now, if you've seen Only in Saskatchewan, you'll know that the photographs are incredibly beautiful, and unfortunately Garrett could not be here tonight. He's photographing a different event, but I did just want to acknowledge him because the photographs really bring the book to life and really give it such vibrancy. So a huge thank you to Garrett for all the work he did. When I first saw them, we were actually meeting up to do some photographs of other ingredients for the local guide in the back of the book, and he just kind of very casually was like, oh yeah, they're done, like go check them out on the laptop. So I go in the corner and I was looking through them and I just started tearing up, but I'm kind of like doing that thing where I'm pretending like, oh, I'm fine. I'm not tearing up because truly they just blew me away, and to see them now in print, they're really incredible. So thank you so much to Garrett Kimball. I would also like to thank Tourism Saskatchewan and SaskArts, both of which provided funding for Only in Saskatchewan. So Tourism Saskatchewan provided funding for Garrett and I to travel and visit all the spots, and SaskArts awarded me an independent artist grant, both of which those sources of funding were so key to the book. The traveling was obviously a huge piece, and then of course, you know, being able to focus solely on the book was also a huge piece. So thank you so much, and I really appreciate that we have such a creative, supportive network here for creative work in the province. It really does make a difference. So thank you to both organizations. And lastly, I just want to thank my family and friends for their support and love along the way. Many family and friends were actually also involved in the recipe testing process for the book, which was so helpful. And really, I've been very fortunate to have such an incredible group of people who have really encouraged me in the pursuit of a creative career. So thank you to all the family and friends. It really makes a difference. And specifically, I would like to thank a couple people, Kayla Donovan, Ellen May Malin, and Stephanie Ma. My in-laws, Janice and Rick Bernuke and Grandma and Grandpa Nelson, my grandparents, Sylvia and Glenn Zolotarczyk and Anne Zervinsky, my parents, Ron and Sandy Zervinsky, my siblings and siblings-in-law, Luke Hansen, Jasper Hudoff, and Anya Zervinsky. And lastly, to my husband and partner, Paul Hansen. Paul really witnessed me at some very difficult moments throughout the process, and it was always there with a cup of coffee or whatever it was I needed. So really thank you so much, Paul, for your ongoing love and support. And again, thank you so much to everyone for being here. I am filled with so much gratitude for the support that this book has received, and it's really been so wonderful just to see the overwhelmingly positive response. I hope you enjoy the evening. Come talk to me and get your book signed. And I did get these balloons for you to take photos with as well. So please do that. I'm also going to be giving away a copy of the book. So there's a draw over there if you want to enter your name. You can win a copy of Only in Saskatchewan. And with that, I will stop rambling and pass it back to you, Rowan, to proceed. So thank you.
Thank you. We're going to do a quick reconfigure the space, and then Naomi and Ashlyn are going to come back up and chat about the book. So just talk amongst yourselves. Okay. So as Naomi mentioned, we have a special guest host today, Ashlyn George. Ashlyn is an award-winning travel writer, photographer, and the content creator behind the Lost Girl's Guide to Finding the World. She's the go-to expert in Saskatchewan, but is no stranger to trips abroad. Having traveled solo through more than 60 countries on all 7 continents, she's a passionate storyteller in pursuit of adventure, learning, and discovery. And you can find her online at The Lost Girl's Guide. So please welcome Ashlyn George in conversation with Naomi Hansen.
Multitasking. Thank you so much for the introduction, Rowan. As Rowan said, my name is Ashlyn George, and I have to say I am so excited to be here tonight celebrating Naomi and her debut book. Very, very exciting. So as Naomi said, I've known her for a few years through the writing industry here in Saskatoon, and it's been such a pleasure to get to know her over that time. And I was so excited a few years ago when she actually wrote me an email and shared with me her idea for the book. And I was so excited to hear about it. And we were talking about some of the restaurants that, you know, might be included in it. So it's so incredible to sit here today and be able to actually see the book in print and have a copy of it and be able to hold it in my hand. So congratulations.
Thank you.
So with that, we'll just dive right in here. So how this is going to work, we're just going to have a bit of a conversation for about a half an hour. And then if any of you have any questions, we'll open it up to whatever you would like to ask Naomi as well. And then afterwards, she'll have her signing. So I think the very first question is, where did this idea come from for the book?
Okay, so about 5 years ago now, I was browsing in an Edmonton bookstore. We were visiting some friends, and I stumbled upon a book called Edmonton Cooks, City Recipes and Stories from the City's Best Chefs. That's a 2016 book by Leanne Brown and Tina Fays. And when I saw that book, it was kind of like a light bulb moment for me, and I was, wondering, do we have something in Saskatchewan like this? So I looked it up, and we didn't have anything like that featured, recipes from chefs and restaurants. So I kind of just, tucked the idea away and then went about with things. But then it was 2019 that I started to think about the idea again, because the food scene here has really undergone such growth and such change. And so I kind of felt the idea, gnawing at me, and decided that I would pitch the book. And here we are, I guess. But that type of book, sort of a collection of recipes from one certain region, is not unique to Edmonton. There have been numerous other books like that on various North American locations. And TouchWood Editions has also done a different one on brunch locations in Victoria. It's called First Food Brunch. So they were, familiar with the concept. And but lots of the other ones have been done on cities. That's kind of the key. They're like a regional city cookbook. With this one, I really felt like the province would be a good fit for the book, and I'm very happy that I went with that over, just Saskatoon or Regina, for example. Reason being that it just sort of allowed the scope of what we were able to include to be, so much wider in terms of the content, but also in terms of the photographs. And so I think that was the right fit for the book.
Well, and I think with how well received the book has been so far, that it was a good choice to go province-wide.
Yeah.
Now, this is a tough one. We have so many restaurants, even just in Saskatoon and across the province, and so many wonderful ones. So how did you choose the restaurants for the book?
Yes, so that was a process. I spent about 6 weeks really doing a deep dive into Saskatchewan's food scene. And there are a couple different things I did. So to start, I actually had a list of about 80 places, many of which made it into the final list. But some of the things were I chatted with a few people, including you, about, what places might be included. I talked to some different food writers and some of the former Saskatchewaners. I also called tourism centers and visitor offices in pretty much every town and city across the province, including Saskatoon, actually, even though I'm from here, just because I wanted to see what they would say. Local people know their city and their place best. And so really just spent 6 weeks kind of, honing the list. And then of course, once I had the selections, I approached the places and we went from there. But the theme of the book is also the title. So obviously it's only in Saskatchewan, but all of the places are entirely unique to the province. And so that was one of the principles that I was sort of going by when I was making the selections, is that, you know, these places don't have another location out of the province. They are completely unique to Saskatchewan.
I love how you covertly called all the tourism destinations in the province to ask some of those places to eat. Very clever. And so you mentioned earlier too that you were able to go and actually visit all the locations.
Yes.
What was that like?
Yeah, so visiting the places was really a key piece to the whole process. There were actually some places that I hadn't been to before, so that was really important. And then, you know, being on site and being able to chat with people, try the food, experience the restaurant, all of that was super important. And even just to see some of the towns and cities that I hadn't been to, of course. The other part of the traveling that was so key was because we were on the road for, it was a 9-month period. Garrett and I did this through 2020 and 2021. And he was able to get some of the really beautiful landscape shots through all the different seasons. So he has a drone and we would just kind of stop on the side of the road. He'd be like, oh, that's cool, we should stop. So we just stop and he would take a photo. And that's how those photos happened, because we, you know, were traveling throughout the various seasons. So yeah, so I mean, the traveling was so huge to both the writing and the photography.
And so once you got to the restaurants, I feel like the next challenge is upon you. How do you decide which recipes that you're going to choose from each of these restaurants?
Yeah, so the recipes, it was kind of two things, I guess. Lots of them were chosen very, very much mutually, like we would go back and forth and sort of decide what we want to be featured. Some of them I sort of knew immediately what I wanted to choose, and luckily they agreed to feature those ones, because the recipes are either, you know, a really sort of iconic spot that is, sorry, a really iconic recipe that is, you know, the most popular recipe or the most popular item at that place, or they sort of have a really strong connection to local food. So, and there's of course some crossover between some places have, or some recipes have the local food connection and also the iconic item. But those were kind of the key things that I was thinking about. There were some other considerations that had to be made. For example, there were some recipes I had selected that I then found out the ingredients wouldn't be available in a grocery store here or even a specialty shop. And so those ones had to be, you know, changed up. Then there were a couple of cases where the recipe used very commercialized equipment that wouldn't be accessible to a home cook. So we couldn't do that either. There were some that we were able to modify, but some it wasn't going to be possible. And then sort of meanwhile, I was trying to balance the types of recipes, not only in the individual chapters, but throughout the book as a whole. So I didn't want, you know, 50% baked goods or 50% breakfast items. I wanted there to be a really sort of cohesive flow in terms of the types of recipes. So lots of things going on there, I guess.
I feel like you need a big puzzle board or, you know, sticky
I had
notes
a lot
everywhere.
of spreadsheets.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love
Yeah.
a good spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And so with all these recipes that you were getting, and like you said, some of them used commercial equipment, so it was difficult
Yeah.
to do that. So with the recipes you chose, did you test them? And
Yes.
what was that like? I feel like that's the really fun part, getting to test all these recipes.
Yeah, so the testing was very important to the process as a whole. Like I said, many of the recipes were sort of scaled down from larger batches in a restaurant to be something that would be more suitable for someone making, you know, serving 4 to 6 people at home. And so just the process of scaling those down, there were very, you know, lots of little details that had to be sort of changed and considered. And so that needed to be tested, of course. And then also if there was a modification, or one example is if something was deep fried, some people do have deep fryers, but not everyone does. And so I wanted to add instructions if you didn't have a deep fryer, for example. So there were some cases where we added some stuff that needed to be tested. But I did have a really wonderful group of family and friends who volunteered to assist me with the testing, which was really great and really helpful. I did quite a few of the tests myself as well. And actually, my husband Paul even tested a couple of the recipes as well. There was one in particular. I was supposed to be testing the duck confit from Crave Kitchen and Wine Bar, which is in Regina. and I had all this other stuff going on and I was not going to be getting to it. So he volunteered to do it. And it was kind of like the ultimate test because if you know Paul, he's not really a cook. So if he was going to be able to do this, right, like the recipe is going to be fine. Anyway, he made it and he made it very successfully. It worked out really well, which I will say maybe the recipe was really well written. Maybe that's why. But he made it and it was successful. And the funny thing is that it's actually kind of become his thing now, making the duck confit. He's made it like 2 or 3 times since, and he doesn't really make much else, but he can make duck confit. He can make a really good duck confit. So, So I'm just want to say that the recipes, that's kind of a cool part of them, is you can make these things at home, and I wanted them to be accessible to people to be able to make. So yeah, if Paul can do it, so can you.
Well, that makes me feel a little bit better.
You're not a cook either.
Paul, you're not alone. I am not a cook, so I think I'll have to go home and try that, and maybe I'll claim that as my own too, to be like, look at what I can make. Hopefully I don't burn the place down. And so you talked about Garrett Kendall and his photography, and you kind of mentioned a little bit about what that photography process was like, especially when you guys were road tripping. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the photos in the book?
Yes, absolutely. So, of course, the photographer is Garrett Kendall. He's a Saskatoon-based photographer. His business is called King Rose Visuals, and he does videography, photography, and drone photography as well. Which is how we got those really beautiful landscape and city shots that are in the book. But the photos were all, one thing that I think is kind of interesting about the photography, and specifically the food photography, is that all of that was completely improvised on site. So we would get to the place, and previously I would sort of look up some ideas of how I might like to photograph the recipe, and we would kind of talk about it. But one thing that was important to me was that we used props and dishes and table settings from the actual restaurants themselves, because I wanted there to be elements in the book that were recognizable to people who, you know, frequented these spots. And so we would get there and we would just kind of be like, okay, what can we do? And we would set it up completely on site. One example of this that's kind of funny is we were at Wolf Willow Winery, which is this beautiful location 20 minutes outside of Outlook. And they have the campground, of course, there too, which their menu is kind of themed on the camping theme. And so what the rest we were featuring was their smoky stovetop popcorn. And we were setting up the photo shoot, and Garrett noticed that there were these antique camping artifacts on the wall. And so we asked if we could use them, and they said yes. And so we just incorporated those elements into the photo. So there's this like rustic red lantern that's in the photo, and a cast iron pan and stuff like that. But that was completely improvised. And I don't think you would necessarily get that from looking at the photos, because they do look very put together. But we were just sort of, you know, what can we use and work together on site, which was a lot of fun.
I love that, because I think it really brings in the authenticity of a place, especially when so many of these restaurants are so highly recognizable around the province too. So
absolutely,
I think that's a lot of fun to come in and just see what you can find and take off the walls and include in the photos.
Yeah.
And so while you guys were doing all of this, I do have to mention it. Obviously, the pandemic was happening.
Yes.
So what was that like, having to manage and deal with that?
Yeah, so when I first pitched the book, the pandemic hadn't started yet. So that wasn't really a consideration I was making in terms of the pitch. But once I actually started working on the book, of course, the pandemic had been going on for a few months. And, you know, I know that the pandemic was really difficult for a lot of industries, but hospitality especially faced a lot of challenges during the pandemic, a lot of changing regulations and, you know, just general uncertainty. So I think, you know, on my behalf, I do just have so much gratitude for the restaurants that said, sure, we'll add this to our plate and be a part of this, you know, despite everything that was happening. But the way, I would say the number one way that the pandemic influenced the book is that there are a few geographical gaps that really otherwise would have been filled, and a few places like major centers that I had hoped to include that are not in the book. And that was because a place that I asked from that place either said no because they, you know, were uncertain about what the future would bring, or they closed permanently. So one example is Amy's on Second, which was a really well-loved spot in Prince Albert. It had been around for 30 plus years, and I had, been chatting with her in hopes that she could be included. And then unfortunately in November of 2020, they had to close permanently, and there's not a different spot in the book from PA. So that was kind of the main way that it sort of influenced the end result, I would say. Just the fact that there are some gaps that otherwise I had hoped to include, unfortunately, just, beyond the circumstances kind of thing.
Yep, that's totally understandable, but at least tonight I'm glad that we were all able to, be here together and gather and celebrate your book launch as well, because I know with the pandemic that would have been difficult to have an event launch. So
yes,
yeah. And so speaking of all these restaurants, I know a lot of them do use local ingredients. We know Saskatchewan obviously is the breadbasket of Canada. So why did you want to highlight all of these specifically Saskatchewan ingredients? Why was that important?
So we are obviously, the breadbasket. I think though, we have so many other incredible ingredients here, and I really wanted to feature those. For example, other staple crops like flax, mustard, pulses, wild rice, and then, prairie fruit, Saskatoon berries, cranberries, sea buckthorn, all these things. And, I could list all the ingredients, but I don't need to do that. But we do have a lot of really wonderful ingredients here. And I actually made this checklist prior to starting the process of figuring out the recipes, thinking that, these were the ingredients I wanted to feature and hoping that I could somehow make it happen. And then once I was actually chatting with the establishments, it was like no problem to check off all the ingredients because so many people are already working with these ingredients. And so that was really wonderful to see. One thing that I think is kind of interesting is that the ingredients are showcased in ways that you might not necessarily expect. So for example, with chickpeas, there's a chickpea pancake, which is kind of a cool thing, not necessarily comes to mind immediately when you think of pulses. And so I think that's kind of neat to see. The other thing is, obviously this book is really about Saskatchewan and people are really excited about it here, but for people outside of Saskatchewan, I do hope that it sort of brings awareness to some of the other ingredients that we have here as well, because we do have so many ingredients to offer.
We're very fortunate here, thinking what we're able to grow and produce.
Yes.
Yeah. With Saskatchewan's food scene, how do you think it has grown and changed, especially in the last few years?
So I think the food scene has really expanded and it's not just restaurants, but it's also things like micro distilleries, micro breweries, market style stores that have local goods only. All of those types of things have really expanded in the last decade. And I think it sort of speaks to a couple things, but one thing that came up a lot in some of the interviews I conducted was that timing of when the food scene sort of has grown since, which is about, I would say, 10 years of the last decade. But that sort of corresponds to when a lot of chefs either moved to the province for the first time or moved back. One really great example of that is Dale McKay, who is from Saskatoon and then worked abroad with Gordon Ramsay, and he worked in numerous kitchens. He won Top Chef Canada in 2011, came back here and opened Aiden Kitchen and Bar in 2013, and then since then founded Grassroots Restaurant Group, and he's opened other restaurants in Saskatoon and Regina, which have been really fundamental to the food scene and pushing that forward. So I think that sort of corresponds with that timing. One thing that's interesting though that about the food scene, and there's a lot of talk about, the food scene has grown and expanded, but there are also a lot of really sort of historic establishments that have been here for numerous decades that are really staples in the province. And so I think that is really evident in the book. There's a good mix of historic, the staple places that have been here for a really long time, and then there's also the new and the newer places that have popped up in the last 10 years. And I think that's evident in the book, but that is very representative also of the province and sort of the food scene in general.
A lot of these restaurants, people are so familiar with them and they travel across the province to go visit them because they are an institution and have been around so long. So in terms of the historical information, why was that important for you to include it? Does anything specifically stand out for you?
So the historical information was important for me to include because personally I am interested in history. That was my university degree. I have a major in history. So I was, personally interested in getting those archival photos and including that information. But I think some places that have been around for decades, 30, 40 years, that's really key to our provincial culinary history and really key to sort of celebrate and to have those places in there. There is one place in Saskatoon that's kind of a cool story, Bubba's Homestyle Pierogies, which is the only pierogi drive-through in all of Canada and possibly globally. It's kind of hard to verify that, but definitely in Canada. And anyway, what's cool about that is prior to Bubba's, there was a different pierogi drive-through in Saskatoon called the O&O Drive-In, and I've heard actually my parents and grandparents talk about going to the O&O. They had, traditional Ukrainian fare and then burgers and ice cream, and you sort of drive up and there's music and stuff. And that one operated on 20th Street from 1962 to 1992, so for 30 years. And then there's Bubba's now, and so the owner of Bubba's, Rob Engel, often gets asked if there's a link between the two restaurants, which there isn't, but of course they have this connection to the Ukrainian food and the pierogi drive-through. So it's just interesting that we are the only place in Canada that has the pierogi drive-through, but we also have this pierogi drive-through history. So I included a photograph of the original O&O from the Saskatoon Library. They had some photos of the sign, and I included that in the book because I think it's just kind of a cool nod to that neat historical tidbit.
I love Bubba's pierogies. I'm part Ukrainian. I grew up in the pierogi belt here in Saskatchewan too. So I used to take pierogies to university for breakfast every morning when I was going to class. So, and I've like taken my bicycle through the drive-through.
I was actually just gonna say, haven't you biked through the drive-through?
So yeah, I really love that place. If you guys haven't been, you definitely need to check it out or just go buy a bag of pierogies. Saskatoon berry ones are really good there. But for you, what was the best part of working on this book?
I think there were a lot of really good things about working on this book. One thing that was definitely a highlight was visiting the spots. I mean, that just kind of gives a lot of color to the experience, especially when you're working on a pandemic project, and then the editing and the writing, and then being able to get out of the house was really lovely. It was also a lot of fun for me being involved in the food photography on site with Garrett. That was a lot of fun for me, and he was very gracious in letting me be involved with that. There are lots of things that were a lot of fun. There are some very specific things. I do love large organizational tasks. And so
Spreadsheets.
Yeah, one thing that I had a ton of fun with that's kind of weird, but it was putting the book in order. And you might think like that would be very difficult, but I was very strategic about how I wanted the book to be in order because I didn't want there to be establishments or recipes back to back that were too similar. Like I wanted there to be a very sort of strategic flow to the book. So I gave myself 2 days sort of close to when the manuscript was going to be due. And I spent 2 days working on this, and it's kind of like a puzzle because there were, the almost 50 recipes, the 40 places, and I was kind of slotting them in and moving them around to see what made sense. But that was a lot of fun.
I think a lot of people might say that could have been one of the most challenging parts of it too,
Yeah.
But I appreciate that because I kind of like those big tasks as well.
Fun.
They're very fun and they feel really wonderful when
You're done. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
you feel that sense of accomplishment. So on the flip side, if that was one of the best parts of working on the book, what's one of the most challenging things you found working through it?
I think the most challenging thing was just going from working on shorter projects and working on much shorter articles to a project of this scale and an ongoing project sort of this scale. That was a complete learning process for me. Obviously, this is my first book, so I didn't know really what to expect in terms of pacing myself and whatnot. So I would say that I really learned a lot about pacing myself throughout the process. And, in hindsight, there were things that I wish I had more time on. There were some things that I think I spent too much time on, but those are things that I wouldn't have known, going into it. So I think that was probably the biggest challenge, but those will be, such useful insights to me going forward. So
For maybe a future book, right?
Maybe.
No pressure. Was there anything that surprised you while you were working on this book?
I I guess it's not necessarily surprising, but one thing that was kind of really reinforced for me throughout the process was just how strongly business owners are committed to supporting local in the province. And that was something that I sort of knew from previous writing work that I had done, but it was something that really came up again and again in the interviews, and something that was, you know, really great to see in action. So I guess I wouldn't say it was surprising, but it was definitely reinforced for me sort of throughout the process, just seeing that very strong commitment to supporting local food. And I think it's worth mentioning because you know, even for me, I'm used to going out to eat and seeing, you know, Pine View Farms chicken on the menu or something like that. And it's worth mentioning because that is not something that just sort of happens out of nowhere. It's a very deliberate choice. Business owners working with local producers and putting that food on their menu. So I think it's definitely worth highlighting, and yeah, to see that in action was really cool.
And I think that's Saskatchewan, right?
Mhm.
There's so much local support, not just in the food industry, but in so many different ways. And we see that time and time again.
Yes.
I think a lot of it comes from our, you know, some of our agrarian roots here as well, that support of,
Yeah.
you know, helping each other out and including each other.
Yeah, even I think the response to the book has been, you know, just that in Saskatchewan spirit too. So yeah.
We're all very excited about it. And so you talked a little bit earlier, just, you know, even when you were younger, coming to McNally Robinson here and checking out all the books, and just, I can totally relate because I've always loved books as well, and just kind of the awe you feel when you step into a bookstore.
Mhm.
So for you, are there any specific books or authors that inspired you in the creation of your book?
Yes, absolutely. So one would be Jen Sharp, who wrote Flat Out Delicious, which is also a TouchWood Editions book. That is a guide to food artisans across the province, and she features about 150 of them. It's really a great resource if you are into food tourism, or if you're, you know, going to a new place and you want to check out what to eat there. But I spoke with Jen very early on in the process just to get some of her recommendations, and I also had a copy, of course, of her book and was kind of using it in some of my early research. So there is a lot of crossover in terms of some of the places featured in her book and my book. But yeah, that was hugely useful to me as well. Another person who has been a source of inspiration to me is Amy Jo Eamon, who's actually here. I was so thrilled when she said she was coming to my launch, I have to say. But Amy's career has really been a source of inspiration for me. She's written some really wonderful books, and of course on Saskatchewan too. So I was actually very lucky to be introduced to her through Paul's side of the family. She's a family friend, and I bother her over email very regularly about questions with stuff, but she's always been very gracious with me. But it's so lovely to have another Sask established author, you know, to sort of look to. So definitely her. And then I also talked to Rebecca Wellman, who's the author of First Week Brunch, which was the Victoria and Breakfast and Brunch restaurants book that I was mentioning earlier, also by TouchWood Edition. And it was just nice to kind of chat with her and hear about the process of working on a book like that, and get some of her thoughts. And then I also looked through First Week Brunch a lot. I actually brought it when we would go to visit the places to kind of show them what it would look like in the end, and also to sort of see the structure as I was going along too. So that would be another one.
And so now that you're an old hand at writing books,
Not at all.
Do you have any advice for anybody who would like to publish and to write and publish their first book?
That's a good question. I think the best thing I can probably just say is that it's really important to just take it one thing at a time. I think when you're contemplating you know, writing a book or publishing a book, it's very easy to sort of get overwhelmed with the enormity of the task. But really just the only way you sort of accomplish anything is, you know, one thing at a time, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. So yeah, it can be a little bit daunting, really. And so just focusing in on sort of the one thing you can do, I think is the only way to really get to the end of that. And that's something that I will really try and use my own advice.
So maybe have a spreadsheet and
yeah.
track all those steps.
I did actually, yeah. So for Only in Saskatchewan, I had multiple spreadsheets really tracking all of the details, because for a book like this, there's so many sort of meticulous details that need to come together and need to be included. I didn't want to miss anything, even the most minor thing, you want to make sure everything's in there. So, so yeah, that was definitely very key for me.
Lots of moving parts,
Yes.
considering the number of recipes and restaurants and
Yes.
people just involved.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I have a few more questions. These are a little bit just more fun and lighthearted. So tell us about your writing space. I wanna know, envision what the setup was while you were writing, and what do you need in your writing space to stay focused?
Okay. Well, so my writing space is in the main part of our living space, because when we moved into the house we rent, I was not planning on working from home full time. So it's kind of in the main area, which is fine during the day. Paul works out of the house and I'm, there with our dog, Rue. But one thing I need to be able to write is pretty much absolute silence. So I don't listen to podcasts or audiobooks or anything like that. I can do sort of, other tasks if there's background noise, but if I'm actually writing, I do need silence. And so, yeah, like I said, during the day, this is fine. I'm there by myself, but I'll pick on Paul again, because in the evenings, if I have to work, or on the weekends, this doesn't work so well because my desk is sort of right there. And when I was working on the book, I was working sort of very long days and late into the evening. And, I'm sitting at my desk and the couch is right there. So Paul is right there. And I am like a hawk. Like if he's like sneezing or coughing, it's like, excuse me, like I'm in my office. Like, and I do feel bad for him, but I do need, absolute silence when I'm working. The other thing I always pretty much have is some sort of beverage, whether it's an iced coffee or a warm coffee. I might not even be, drinking it, and it can be like cold coffee, but I just need to sort of have something there as an option.
So not just a beverage, but coffee. Always
Yes,
coffee.
Definitely. I sometimes switch to tea in the afternoon. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. And for you, 3 choices here: ebook, print, or audiobook.
Absolutely print. I'm definitely a print person. I love books, and that's probably why I've always loved McNally Robinson. Being surrounded by books is very comforting to me. And yeah, I also, the way that I read books is I will often mark them up. I'll sort of underline and circle things that I want to, come back to or refer to later. I use sticky notes and fold down corners, all that kind of stuff. And so I don't feel that I can do that really as well with an ebook or an audiobook. I also really try and actively limit the time I spend on screens outside of working. So having, a tangible book is really key for me. And I probably will always 100% be print person. Yeah.
I always think back to when ebooks kind of became a thing and were the new thing, and everyone was like, oh no, this is the end for published books. And that it definitely wasn't, and it will never be.
Yeah.
And I agree. I'm very tactile as well. And just to be able to hold that book in your hand, it just feels a lot more personal, especially when you know the attention to detail that goes into even little things like the type of paper, the weight of it, and the feel of it. It all adds to that experience of it too. Yeah. This might be a little bit tough, but if you could describe Only in Saskatchewan in 3 words, how would you describe your book? And you can't say only in Saskatchewan.
Okay. The actual book or the process of writing it?
Whichever.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do describe the writing of it. So I would say encouraging for one. It was really encouraging to talk to people and just to see sort of the direction our food scene is going, and the strong commitment to local. And even now, the response that the book has gotten has been so encouraging. So really, every step of the way, it's been an encouraging experience for me. I would also say challenging, because it was my first book and there were a lot of things I didn't know and that I needed to learn. So definitely some good challenges for sure. And that would be my number 2 word, challenging. And then the 3rd word, which I think would be the most important word, would be rewarding. It's just to see, 2.5 years ago, the book was just an idea, and then it was a book pitch, and then it was a project, and then, a manuscript, an edited manuscript, designed PDF, and now a print book. And now it's something that people can purchase and have in their homes and use. That whole process is very rewarding and very satisfying, to see that all come to life. So so that, yeah, and even now, I mean, the response that the book has got too is very rewarding to see. That's been really lovely. So yeah.
I love that. A good combination of everything, a good recipe, right?
Yes.
And so last question, the no pressure, because I know we're still celebrating this one, but what's next for you?
Yeah, so I know that I would like to do future books. I don't really know necessarily what those books will be, but you know, I'm really trying to enjoy this one and just kind of soak up the moment. But yes, another book is definitely on my radar. I'm just, you know, not sure what yet, but all I can say is stay tuned.
I think we'll all be greatly anticipating that next one.
It'll be about groovy girls.
That's a niche audience too, though, right? So with that, that does conclude kind of the official conversation between Naomi and I. So I wanted to open it up to the audience if any of you have questions. And I think we're kind of small enough here that if you do have a question, just pop your hand up and I'll just kind of direct you. And if you want to stand up, sometimes it's a little bit easier to hear, especially with the masks on. But yeah, does anybody?
I'm also gonna come around. I'm gonna come around with this mic just so that the people on the live stream can hear as well.
That's awesome, even better. So yeah, does anybody have any questions? Don't be shy.
No pressure at all. I mean, you can also ask questions informally, right?
Yes.
Or
you can
right
definitely ask
now.
questions. Hi.
I guess from this whole process, did you come discover a favorite recipe from any places you visited in the past?
Yeah, there are a lot of good recipes. It's hard to pick a favorite. I did try all of them and then tested a good chunk of them as well. So I did get to try every single thing. Well, the duck confit is, you know, an obvious favorite over here.
Well done.
There are a couple that I really enjoyed and I tested and have kind of become ones that I know that I'm definitely going to make again. One is the shakshuka from Freebird in Lumsden. It's a brunch dish and it's kind of a tomato and veggie breakfast bake that you make in a cast iron pan. That one is really great and definitely one that I'll refer to again. There are also some really great recipes for cocktails, I have to say, which might be some of the ones that, you know, you might not think to make, but there's one, the North Sask Spruce Cocktail from Maple Hill Farm Kitchen and Marketplace in Nipawin. And if you want to make it, you have to get spruce tips, which are available in the province right now. It's spruce tip season. Yeah, that one is, it tastes like a evergreen forest in a glass pretty much. So that one is really great. But yeah, I mean, honestly, all of the recipes are great. You can't really go wrong. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Are there any locations that you wanted to include that turned you down and maybe regretting it now?
Well, that's a great question. So there were some that did say no, and that was largely due to some concerns about the pandemic. At that point, that was sort of early 2020, or summer of 2020, sorry. So it was, you know, it was really, there was a lot of uncertainty about what was going to happen and how long the pandemic was going to be. There were a few places that said no because they didn't want to include a recipe. They didn't want to give out their recipes. And I sort of thought that might be an issue. It wasn't really as big of an issue as I thought it would be, but there were definitely a couple that said no for that reason. As to whether or not they're regretting it, I can't say. Maybe. It's hard to say. I mean, those reasons though are completely valid too, and I totally understand. So.
Are there some locations where you went to and perhaps competitors noticed that you were somebody and said, hey, you know, where's us instead?
No, actually that didn't happen at all. And I don't think anyone would have known when we were there. You know, we visited the spots and we were in the place, but I don't necessarily know that there was that much awareness, I guess, of the book sort of prior to it coming out. So that did not happen, luckily.
I'm just wondering, were there any recipes that were very rewarding, whether it was like traveling there or reworking the recipes or like going there and finding an experience, like any of those that you really like stick with you, I guess?
That's a good one. So one thing that was rewarding was that some of them, I won't say which ones, but there were a few recipes that I really had to spend a lot of time with. And I retested them multiple times actually, because something was not quite right. And I am very particular, so I wanted them to be perfect. But the process of doing that was very rewarding and very sort of satisfying. Like there were a couple where I had to go back to, like they were tested and something didn't work. So I had to go back to the original, sort of see what maybe had gone wrong, measure all the ingredients out in sort of the large form and then again in the smaller form, and just like making all these sorts of comparisons. Like I would have sort of sheets of notes and what I was doing and, you know, tracking all the steps so I could go back again if something didn't work out that second time or third time in some cases. And then once they did work, it was really great, obviously. So that was really rewarding. I don't know if there was like a specific one that was super, yeah, I won't say which ones had to be tested multiple times, but it did happen, and the process of them, you know, working was very exciting. Yeah.
Hi, Naomi.
Hi, Mom.
You know, I can't avoid not asking a question. So my question for you is, what is the most exciting thing about writing your first book and being a published author?
Good one, Mom. I think kind of what I said before, but just seeing the physical book after putting in all of that time and then, you know, I submitted the manuscript and then there was a year really of editing and designing, and then I saw, you know, the actual physical PDF, but to actually see the print book is a lot different. And that was really exciting. It's been very surreal. You know, I have come into McNally a couple times and I see like the stand with Only in Saskatchewan. And even just to, you know that it is selling so well is very surreal, not necessarily something that I was anticipating. So all of that has been such a wonderful experience though, and seeing the physical book though, I think would probably be sort of the most exciting thing. It kind of like gears you up like, okay, yeah, let's do that again. Like, so yeah.
Any other questions? One more.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that I've been waiting for this book since January.
Oh.
When I first heard about it. I was in a writing class with our friend Lori, and I said to her I was coming tonight and I want to make sure I get the book autographed. She said, maybe I'm sure that you'll autograph it.
Of course, yes.
It was very nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, Maggie.
Perfect. Well, I think that'll probably wrap up the formal part of the evening. So thank you all for coming and asking so many wonderful questions for Naomi as well too. And just one more time, Naomi, congratulations. This is
Thank
really
you so much.
amazing.
Thank you.
That was the perfect segue into talking about the book signing. So, of course, huge thanks to Naomi Hansen, to everyone at TouchWood Editions, to our host, Ashlyn George, and all of you for being here tonight. I'm speaking for Naomi, but she'll stick around and sign her books, right? Of course, yeah. So again, thanks everyone, and let's give them both a big round of applause. Oh, and there are lots of books at the front if you still need one.
So do they pay for the book first?
Doesn't matter. Either.